I can still hear the sirens, how they drowned out my screams as they tore Malik away from me. But that was only the beginning. The words of a tired, trembling voice hung in the courtroom air like a dense fog, thick with pain and unspoken fury. The speaker was Anita Graham, a mother who had spent the past 6 months fighting for her son's innocence in a case that had divided an entire city. It was a story that had started long before the police raid on their quiet suburban home, and it would not end here in the courtroom, surrounded by reporters scribbling down every detail, neighbors staring with a mix of pity and suspicion, and a justice system that was anything but blind. It all began with the move. Anita, a single mother of 2, had spent years saving up to leave the decaying inner city for a better life. When she found a modest home in Crestwood Heights, a predominantly white, middle-class neighborhood, she thought she had finally won. For Malik, her 17-year-old son, and Kayla, her 10-year-old daughter, it was a chance to escape the violence and chaos that had shadowed their lives in the city. Crestwood Heights was safe, with well-manicured lawns, excellent schools, and quiet streets. But safety, Anita would soon learn, came with its own price. The first week in Crestwood Heights was uneventful, almost pleasant. Neighbors waved politely, and while their smiles felt thin, Anita chose to see it as her family being new, not unwanted. But then came the first incident. On a crisp Monday morning, Malik was walking Kayla to school. As they passed a house with a sprawling garden and a flagpole bearing an oversized American flag, a man emerged. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that seemed permanently set in disapproval. He barked. Malik stopped instinctively, pulling Kayla closer. "Yeah, you. What are you doing here?" the man demanded. Malik's voice was calm, measured. "Just walking my sister to school, sir." The man stared at them for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "Just making sure. We don't get trouble around here." The words stung, their meaning as sharp as a blade. Malik didn't respond, but Kayla whispered, "Why's he so mean?" As they hurried away. By the end of the first month, Anita started noticing things she couldn't explain. A trash can overturned on the curb. Scratches on her car that hadn't been there the night before. And once, the word "Go-hum" scrawled on their mailbox in red marker. She tried to brush it off, not wanting to alarm the kids. But Malik, with his perceptive nature, knew something was wrong. "Mom, it's them," he said one evening after dinner. "Them? Who?" Anita asked, feigning ignorance. "The neighbors. They don't want us here." Anita sighed. "Malik, not everyone is like that. You can't jump to conclusions." "I'm not jumping to conclusions," he shot back. "I'm telling you what I see." What Malik didn't tell her was what he had been experiencing at school. How his classmates had whispered behind his back. How some teachers seemed to look through him rather than at him. Or how, on more than one occasion, he'd come back to his locker to find it filled with trash. The tension boiled over one Friday afternoon. Malik had just returned home from school, his backpack slung over one shoulder when he noticed something off. The front lawn, freshly mowed the day before, was covered in toilet paper. "Malik, what is this?" Anita yelled from the front door, horrified. "I didn't do it, Mom," he said defensively. As they stood there, the man from earlier, the flagpole man, appeared on his driveway, grinning smugly. Anita froze, the pieces clicking into place. "What's so funny?" she demanded. "The nothing," the man said, his voice dripping with mock innocence. "Just wondering if this is what your kind calls landscaping." Anita felt her blood boil, but Malik stepped in front of her, his fists clenched. "You don't get to talk to her like that." "Malik," Anita warned, grabbing his arm. "No, Mom," he said, shaking her off. "Not this time." The man's grin widened. "Careful, boy. Don't want to end up in a place where people don't ask questions before they shoot." The words were like a slap. Anita dragged Malik inside before he could say something that might escalate the situation further. That night, Anita sat alone in the living room, her hands shaking as she clutched a mug of cold coffee. She didn't know how to protect her kids from a world that saw them as threats before humans. And then the phone rang. It was Malik. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're outside. I think they're trying to break in." Anita's heart raced as Malik's words sank in. She gripped the phone tightly, her voice trembling but firm. "Malik, stay calm. Where are you?" "I'm in my room. I locked the door," he whispered. "But I can hear them, Mom. They're banging on the back door." Anita shot to her feet, grabbing her car keys. "Stay on the line with me. Don't move. I'm coming." The 15-minute drive back to Crestwood Heights felt like an eternity. Every second was punctuated by Malik's panicked breathing on the other end of the call. "I think they're leaving," he said finally. Anita exhaled shakily. "Okay. Oh, kid, I'm almost there. Just stay put." When she pulled into the driveway, her headlights illuminated the kiosk. The back door's glass was shattered, shards glinting on the patio. A brick lay in the middle of the living room, surrounded by splinters of wood. On it was scrawled a single word, LEAV. Police arrived half an hour later, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the house. Officer Davis, a tall, stern-faced man, took their statements but offered little reassurance. "Did you see anyone?" he asked Malik. "No, but I heard them. They were laughing," Malik said, his hands still shaking. Officer Davis sighed. "Without witnesses or video evidence, there's not much we can do." Anita's voice rose. "Not much you can do. Someone tried to break into my house and terrorized my son. Is this what we're paying taxes for?" "I understand your frustration, Mom," Davis said, his tone clipped. "But unless there's proof, our hands are tied." As the officers left, Anita felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She hugged Malik tightly, whispering, "We'll get through this. I promise." The next morning, Anita knocked on the door of her neighbor across the street, Mrs. Peters, a retired widow who had always seemed kind, if distant. "Good morning, Mrs. Peters," Anita began, forcing a polite smile. "I was wondering if your security cameras caught anything from last night." Mrs. Peters hesitated, her face clouding with discomfort. "Oh, I'm not sure. My cameras, well, they don't always work properly." Anita's smile faltered. "Could you at least check?" "I suppose," Mrs. Peters said reluctantly. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Peters stopped by with an apologetic shrug. "I'm so sorry, dear. It seems the cameras weren't recording. I wish I could help." Anita didn't miss the unease in her eyes, the way she avoided meeting her gaze. 2 days later, the harassment escalated. Malik had just left for school when Anita noticed the damage. Her car tires were slashed, and someone had spray-painted THUGS across the garage door in bright red letters. Anita felt her composure cracking. She called the police again, but their response was the same. "Without evidence. Ma'am, there's not much we can do." That evening, Malik came home from school visibly shaken. "Mum, they're starting on me at school," he said, dropping his backpack on the floor. "What happened?" Anita asked, alarmed. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone to show her a video. It was a recording him in the cafeteria, surrounded by a group of students who were chanting, "Go back where you came from." "They're posting this everywhere," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't even go to class without someone making a comment." Anita's chest tightened with anger and despair. "Did you tell anyone?" "A teacher, the principal." "They don't care," Malik said bitterly. "They just tell me to ignore it." By that night, Anita found herself pacing the living room, unable to sleep. She kept replaying the events in her head, trying to figure out how to protect her children. She didn't notice Malik standing in the doorway until he spoke. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't think we should have moved here." Anita turned to face him, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. "We moved here for a better life," she said softly. "But it's not better," he replied. "It's worse. I don't think they'll ever accept us." Anita knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "They don't have to accept us, Malik, but we're not going to let them chase us away. This is our home now, and no one is going to take that from us." But even as she said the words, doubt crept into her mind. She didn't know how much more they could take. 1 week later, the breaking point came. Malik was out late with friends from his old neighborhood, trying to escape the suffocating atmosphere of Crestwood Heights. When Anita heard the knock on the door, she wasn't expecting 2 police officers standing on her porch. "Are you Anita Graham?" one of them asked. "Yes," she said warily. "What's going on?" "We need you to come with us," the officer said. "Your son, Malik, has been arrested." Anita felt the world tilt. "What? Why?" "There was an incident at a convenience store. He matches the description of a suspect." "No," Anita said firmly. "My son would never." "We can discuss this at the station," the officer interrupted. As they escorted her to the police car, Anita's mind raced. She knew this wasn't just about Malik being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was about them being the wrong people in the wrong neighborhood. And it wasn't over yet. Anita stormed into the police station, her fury barely contained. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow over the waiting room. She spotted Malik sitting behind a glass partition in handcuffs, his face pale but defiant. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to turn heads. A young officer approached, clipboard in hand. "Mom, your son was picked up near the scene of a robbery at a convenience store." Wince's claim. "Witnesses," Anita interrupted. "What witnesses?" "Malik was at his friend's house tonight. He doesn't have anything to do with this." The officer hesitated. "We're still gathering statements." "Let me see him," Anita demanded. After what felt like an eternity, they led her to Malik. She rushed to him, her hands trembling as she cupped his face. "Baby, you okay?" Malik nodded, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "Mom, I didn't do anything, I swear." "I know," she said fiercely. "And we're going to prove it." But Anita called every lawyer she could think of, but most wouldn't take the case without a hefty retainer she couldn't afford. Finally, a friend from her old neighborhood connected her with Avery Thompson, a no-nonsense civil rights attorney known for taking on cases like Malik's. When Avery arrived at the station, his presence was commanding. A tall-should black man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. He exuded confidence. "Let's start with the evidence," he told the officers. The detective in charge, a gruff man named Detective Harper, laid out their case. "We have a witness who claims they saw your client running from the store, and he matches the description: young, black male, wearing a hoodie." Avery raised an eyebrow. "That's not a description, that's a stereotype." Harper bristled. "We also have surveillance footage." "Let's see it," Avery said. The footage was grainy, the kind of low-quality video that made distinguishing features impossible. The figure in the video wore a hoodie, but the face was obscured. "This is your smoking gun?" Avery asked, unimpressed. "The time matches when he was picked up," Harper argued. "Circumstantial," Avery countered. "Do you have fingerprints, DNA, anything tying my client to the scene?" Harper's silence was answer enough. "This is a joke," Avery said. "You're holding an innocent teenager because he fits a vague description. Release him now, or I'll make sure this department regrets it." Despite Avery's pressure, the police refused to let Malik go, claiming they needed more time to investigate. Anita's frustration boiled over as she and Avery left the station. "They're trying to railroad him," she said. "They are," Avery agreed. "But we won't let them. I'll file a motion to have him released on bail, and we'll start building our defense." Over the next few days, Anita and Avery worked tirelessly. Malik's friends provided alibis, but the police dismissed them as biased. Anita combed through every detail of the case, refusing to rest until she found something that could exonerate her son. Then, a breakthrough came. One of the convenience store employees, a young woman named Sarah, came forward. She admitted she had seen the real suspect more clearly than she initially let on. "He wasn't Malik," she said. "He was taller, older, and had a scar on his cheek. I told the cops, but they didn't seem interested." Anita felt a surge of hope. With Sarah's testimony and the lack of solid evidence against Malik, Avery filed a motion to have the charges dropped. But the fight wasn't over. As the court date approached, Anita noticed the harassment in Crestwood Heights intensifying. Her car was keyed again. Kayla came home crying after a classmate told her, "Your brother's a criminal." And one night, Anita woke to find their front lawn on fire. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail. The fire department put out the blaze before it could spread, but the message was clear: they weren't welcome. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras capturing every moment. Anita sat beside Avery, clutching Malik's hand. The prosecutor tried to argue that Malik's presence near the crime scene was suspicious, but Avery dismantled their case piece by piece. "You have no evidence," he told the judge. "No fingerprints, no DNA, and now we have a witness who confirms the suspect doesn't match my client's description." The judge frowned at the prosecutor. "This case should never have been brought to trial. Charges are dismissed." The gavel struck, and Anita felt tears streaming down her face as the courtroom erupted. But as they left the courthouse, Anita's relief was short-lived. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, some holding signs that read, "Justice for the store owner," and "Keep our neighborhood safe." One man stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. It was the flagpole man. "This isn't over," he snarled. "People like you don't belong here." Anita stared him down, her voice steady. "We're not going anywhere." That night, as they sat together in their living room, Anita hugged her children tightly. "This is our home," she said. and no one is going to take it from us. But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The weeks following Malik's exoneration were anything but peaceful. Anita and her family became the center of a maelstrom of gossip, threats, and escalating hostility. Every day brought a new challenge: anonymous hate mail shoved into their mailbox, slurs spray painted on their driveway, and stares that burned holes in their backs whenever they ventured outside. But Anita wasn't about to back down. One afternoon, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Mr. Jameson, an elderly man who lived 2 doors down. His expression was solemn, his eyes darting nervously over his shoulder. "I need to talk to you," he said in a low voice. Anita hesitated. "About what?" "About Todd Whitfield." The name hit Anita like a thunderclap. Todd was the flagpole man, the one who had harassed her family from the moment they moved in. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Mr. Jameson entered, wringing his hands. "I've lived here a long time," he began. "Seen a lot of things. But what Todd's been doing to you and your kids, it's not right." Anita folded her arms, her tone sharp. "You think I don't know that?" Mr. Jameson shook his head. "I mean, I have proof." He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to her. "I have security cameras that cover the street. I've seen him vandalizing your property, and I've seen him lurking around at night. It's all on here." Anita's breath caught. "Why are you giving this to me now?" "Because it's gone too far," Mr. Jameson said, "and because I'm ashamed I didn't come forward sooner." That evening, Anita watched the footage with Avery by her side. The videos were damning: Todd slashing her tires and throwing the Molotov cocktail and spray, painting slurs on the garage door. "We've got him," Avery said, his voice firm. But Anita's relief was tempered by anger. "This doesn't erase what he's done to us." "No, but it gives us leverage," Avery said. "We can press charges. We can hold him accountable." The next day, Anita and Avery filed a restraining order against Todd and submitted the evidence to the police. It wasn't long before officers arrived at Todd's home, slapping him with charges of harassment, vandalism, and arson. The arrest sent shockwaves through Crestwood Heights. Some neighbors expressed quiet support for Anita, while others whispered that she was stirring up trouble. But Todd wasn't done. Released on bail, he returned to his home and doubled down on his campaign of intimidation. One night, Anita woke to the sound of shattering glass. She bolted out of bed, heart pounding, and found Malik standing in the living room, holding a baseball bat. "Stay back, Mum," he said, his voice steady but tense. Through the broken window, Todd stood in the yard, a shotgun slung over his shoulder. His voice was a drunken slur, but the hatred in his words was crystal clear. "You think you've won," he yelled. "This is MY neighborhood. You'll never belong here." Anita grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she described the situation. The minutes felt like hours, but soon the flashing lights of police cars flooded the street. Officers tackled Todd to the ground, disarming him and dragging him away in handcuffs. The incident made headlines. The media painted Todd as a symbol of hate and Anita as a mother fighting for her family's right to exist in a place that didn't want them. But for Anita, the victory was bittersweet. In the days that followed, something shifted in the neighborhood. A few neighbors came by to apologize for their silence. Mrs. Peters brought over a pie and awkwardly offered to cover the cost of repairing the window. Mr. Jameson became a regular visitor, sharing stories of his own struggles with standing up to people like Todd. For the first time, Anita felt a glimmer of hope. Months later, as Anita sat on the porch with Malik and Kayla, she looked out at the street that had once been a battlefield. "We did it," she said softly. Malik nodded. "Yeah, we did." They knew the scars of their ordeal would take time to heal, but they also knew they had won something far greater than a house in Crestwood Heights. They had claimed their right to be seen, to be heard, and to belong. The neighborhood was no longer just a place they lived. It was their home.